Today, we're diving into one of the most radical and controversial books of the 20th century, Julius Evola's Revolt against the Modern World. Now, this isn't just a book. It's really a declaration of war on the entire idea of progress, a complete takedown of the principles that have shaped our lives for hundreds of years.
The entire book really starts with one deeply unsettling question. What if everything we call progress is actually just a freefall? What if our civilization isn't climbing higher, but is actually collapsing in on itself? This is the wild premise that Evola uses to build his entire worldview.
And wow, this quote from the foreword just lays it all out, doesn't it? Evola isn't pulling any punches here. He's not interested in small critiques or little reforms. He sees the modern world as a corpse, and the only thing keeping it moving is the momentum of its own fall. It's a really stark vision, and it sets the stage for everything else.
So to get our heads around this, here's our game plan. We'll start with how Evola sees the modern crisis, then look at his unique take on history. We'll explore the big conflict between tradition and modernity, figure out what he means by the traditional world, trace how he thinks it all fell apart, and finally, look at the book's lasting influence.
Okay, first up, the crisis. For Evola, all the problems we see in the modern world, consumerism, political chaos, you name it, they're not the real disease. He says they're just the final, ugly symptoms of a sickness that's been growing for centuries. Modernity isn't just flawed. In his view, it is fundamentally sick. And when you see how he describes this sickness, it's just total. The whole idea of progress, he calls it an absurd myth that we made up to feel good about ourselves. He sees people today not as advanced but as weakened, living in a kind of twilight. All the protests and reactions we see, to him, that's just the sound of a sick patient thrashing around in a bed of agony, with no real purpose or center. So for him, the point isn't to fix modernity, it's to wake up from it, like it's a nightmare.
So, the big question is, how did we end up here? To explain it, Evola lays out his own version of history. But I'll tell you right now, it's nothing like what you learned in school. He calls it a metaphysics of history, because it's not about economics or politics, it's about the spiritual decline of humankind.
And this is where things get really different. He basically throws out what we'd call historical science. He's not interested in data in academic papers. For him, the real truth, the deeper stuff, is hidden away in myths, legends, and old sagas. Why? Because he believes those ancient stories hold a higher reality than any collection of so-called facts.
Using that unique method, he gets to the absolute core of his book, this idea of a great dualism, a huge split. Evola argues that you can understand all of human history as one long, epic struggle between two totally opposite kinds of civilization.
But first, we absolutely have to get this word right, tradition. When Evola says it, he's not talking about, Thanksgiving dinner or folk music. We're talking tradition with a capital T. To him, it's the connection to a higher, timeless, spiritual reality. It's a sacred order, and its truths aren't things you learn in a book, they're things you have to remember.
This chart here really puts it all side by side. On the one hand, you've got the world of tradition. It's all about being. What's eternal, what's sacred, what's unchanging. It's about quality and spiritual hierarchy. And then you've got the modern world. It's obsessed with becoming. Constant change, material stuff. It's all about quantity, equality, and individualism, which to Evola are just other words for chaos.
So if that's the ideal, what does a traditional society actually look like in his mind? What are the building blocks that hold this world of order together? Well, the absolute foundation is something he calls the Doctrine of Two Natures. The idea is actually pretty simple. He says there are two realities, our messy, physical, changing world, and a higher, perfect, eternal, spiritual world. And the entire point of a traditional society is to make our world down here a reflection of that perfect world up there. And how do you do that? Through a very rigid hierarchy. He uses the ancient caste system as a kind of universal model. At the very top, you have the spiritual leaders, the people directly connected to that higher world. Below them, the warrior nobility who defend that sacred order. Then come the merchants, who deal with material things, and at the bottom, the laborers. But the key here is that this isn't about money. It's a spiritual ladder, organized from the top down. At the very peak of this whole pyramid sits the divine king. But his job isn't just political. He's a pontifex, which is a Latin word that literally means bridge builder. Think of him as the living bridge between the human world and the divine world. And his authority doesn't come from a vote, it comes from that sacred connection.
And to back this up, Evola pulls out quotes from ancient writers like this one. The idea is simple. The person in charge of the kingdom was also the head priest. There was no separation of church and state because the state itself was seen as a sacred thing.
And he says he sees this pattern all over the ancient world. You look at the Egyptian pharaoh. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a manifestation of a god. Or the Roman emperors, who were linked to the sun god. The Persian shahs. In all these places, the ruler was seen as more than just a man. He was a pipeline for divine power on earth.
Okay, so if that was the gold standard, what the heck happened? This brings us to Evola's view of history as a cycle. And it's not a story of progress. It's a 4-act story of a great fall from grace. So for Evola, history starts with a perfect golden age. Then things begin to slip in the Silver Age. After that comes the Bronze Age, the age of heroes trying to hold on to what's left of the old order. And finally, guess where we are now? Yep, the Iron Age. Or what's called the Kali Yuga in Hindu thought, the Dark Age. The absolute bottom, an age of total materialism and spiritual collapse.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, wow, that is an incredibly bleak picture, you're not wrong. The natural question is, if this is where we are, what is a person supposed to do?
Well, his answer is pretty unexpected. He says trying to fight back politically to be a reactionary is totally pointless. That's just more of that thrashing around in the bed of agony. Instead, he calls for a radical kind of inner resistance. He thinks the world is already doomed, so the only battle you can win is the one inside yourself.
And this quote just says it all. Ride the wave. It's such a powerful image, right? You can't stop this giant tidal wave of modern chaos, but you can learn to stay on your feet, to keep your balance, to hold on to your principles while the entire world around you is dissolving. The goal is to become your own little island of order in a giant ocean of chaos.
Now, as you can probably imagine, the legacy of this book is, well, it's really complicated and deeply controversial. It's a cornerstone text for a philosophical movement called the Traditionalist School. It's also been incredibly influential for some radical and far-right political groups. But at the same time, it sparked a new interest in looking at history in a non-materialist way, and it's still studied and fiercely debated in universities today.
So let's just boil it all down. The book's title is no exaggeration. It is a full-on, systematic rejection of the modern world. The core belief is that our civilization is just the final, decaying stage of a long fall away from a golden age, a fall away from a world of tradition built on hierarchy and spiritual truth. And so, Evola's book leaves us with this really tough question to chew on. Whether you agree with him or you think he's completely wrong, he forces you to ask, if the modern values we hold so dear, like progress and equality, really are signs of decay, then what's the alternative? What principles could possibly build a true and lasting order in our world?